All right, guys, it's planer time. So let's look at the planer. We have hopefully just finished cutting out all of our strips. You've used the joiner, and now you're ready to make the top of the material that you just cut at the joiner parallel to the bottom surface which you just finished cutting. In order to do that, let's go over the 15 questions we have on the planer quiz. So number one is always wear your ANSI Z87 safety glasses with side shields when using the planer. This is a small Makita planer. This is the 2012NB, and I have chosen this particular planer as the one that we use for starting our projects out because if you do some basic research, it is actually the quietest planer on the market as of right now, and the decibel rating on it is pretty low. So I used to use the DeWalt's, which I absolutely love. It's a great planer. The surface that it creates is amazing. However, it is also a really noisy machine, and to have a couple of those running in our shop make it impossible to hear any conversation going on in here. So that's the reason that we have these machines. The blades are actually really easy to replace on this one as well. Not quite as easy as the DeWalt, but still really easy. I like this machine a lot. So we have two of these. In addition to this, we also have the large 24-inch Oliver over there that's been here longer than I've been alive, and we're in the process of getting a helical head from Bird Tool put on that right now. So number two, it says never plain stock less than 1/4 of an inch thick. If the material is, right now this is about 3/4 of an inch thick. If the material is 1/4 of an inch thick or less, it needs to be run straight through the drum sander, and you'll have to get my help for that. Otherwise, if you try to put it through here, it's too flexible, it's going to shatter, and the machine will just tear it up and spit it out as splinters. Okay. Number three, never operate a planer without the cutter head guard or cover in place. So this right here is the guard that goes over the cutter head. You shouldn't see the cutter head while the machine is being used. And so we have this big plastic shroud that goes over this thing, and then on the back side of it, I have this one taken off on this machine. There's actually a big dust collector port that goes on the back side that will collect all the chips as it comes through here where the dust gate is. I want to point this out as well. So this particular gate has been slightly modified so that it doesn't clog. So the next thing you need to do is, before you use the machine, you got to open the dust gate. As the dust is coming out, this particular gate used to have the back filled in as open, sorry, as like a little groove on the inside of this thing. And what happened is, when every time you take the gate, the back little corner here would shove the little bit of sawdust into that little crevice to where you couldn't close the gate anymore, and this would stay open basically, which kills suction to everything else in the shop. It also keeps it noisy in here. So just be careful. Don't pull this out with a ton of pressure. Be aware that this thing is going to just be loose. You just need to pull it out 3/4 of the way and just leave it here. If you pull it out all the way, you can just stick it back in a little bit just so that it's resting there, and when you're done, push it back in. It's set this way so that it doesn't clog, and we can easily maintain the machine without having to tear this gate apart all the time. Number 4 says, be cautious of knots in the wood. They can be thrown out of the workpiece or cause kickback. We talked about that in the joiner video, so I'm not going to beat that one to death anymore. Number 5, properly support long material with the infeed and outfeed stands as needed to maintain control. I talked about that in the joiner video as well, but for the most part in my shop classes, you guys will just be working on short things that you can store in a locker. If you, for some reason, had a really long board for a different project, you do want to use some kind of an infeed or outfeed table. The best thing you can actually get is just a buddy to help hold the material that will work with you after the material is running through the machine, to kind of catch it on the backside, hold it at the same level as the tool, and walk backwards. And then they can catch it as you walk around and then go get the other end. So a partner is the best system. The second best system is a rigid stand or table. My preferred tool out there, if you want to look up something and you're into really, different types of tools, Rigid makes a really cool outfeed stand that has a little table on it that just like flops down a little bit to catch the material, and then it will level itself out. They're great. They're not roller style. So the reason I don't like rollers is if you take the roller and you have the roller kind of at one particular angle like this, and then you run your material over it, it's going to want to pull that material out in whatever direction the roller is going. And so it makes it really hard to feed your material perfectly straight without getting that roller stand lined up precisely. And that could cause an issue, especially on a table saw. It's very, very dangerous. So for that reason, I don't like roller stands for this type of application where you're feeding stock through a table. Okay, let's get back to the questions. Number 6, never plane wood shorter than 12 inches. In-feed and out-feed rollers must be able to secure the material continuously. Let's look at the actual reason that that is a rule, okay? There is a rule in place for a reason. I didn't just make it up. So inside this machine, when you look in underneath here, which you really shouldn't be doing while the machine's plugged in, you should always make sure the machine's unplugged and the power's disconnected before you're looking in there. But what you'll find that's covered underneath the cutter head inside this thing is there's a blade, okay, which is the cutter head, that has little blades on it. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 2, but for this drawing it's just 2. And there's a roller on this side and on this side. So this is the front of the machine over here. And the rollers, when you turn the machine on, are moving at the same speed, and they're at a different height, because as the machine comes in, the first roller needs to grab the material and pull it in. Then the material gets cut, and then the second roller needs to grab the material at the new thickness, which is shorter, and continue to pull it all the way through. The distance from this roller to this roller is what determines the safe ability to use the machine. You want a little bit of extra in addition to the center of the rollers. So if these rollers are, for example, like 11 inches from center to center, the minimum length you'd want to cut is 12 inches, just to make sure your material grabs and it gets pulled through and it doesn't slip and then get thrown backwards after it's thinner, because this thinner material will not get grabbed by this roller. That becomes really dangerous. So that's why we have a 12-inch minimum length, is because of the distance between rollers on the different planers that we use. It's the minimum length of the larger machine. That way we don't have any issues. Depending on where you decide to go, you don't have to know the real nuances of every particular machine in the shop. So that's the safest number. If you're using your tools at home, what you need to do to determine what your shop minimum is lift the planer head up all the way, or drop the table down, depending on the type of tool you have, and measure from the outside edge of one roller to the outside edge of the other, and that'll give you the minimum safe distance to be working with in your shop. Okay, so that being said, let's go back to the tool questions. Number 7, always open the dust gate before operating the planer and close it when finished. So again, we just talked about that. You're going to open this dust gate here before we start cutting. Don't try to remove too much material in one pass. To get smooth cuts with a minimal amount of tear out, the planer should be set to about a 32nd of an inch per pass, or it says inch, between the top and the material of the cutter head. So the way that we do that, I set this machine a little bit differently than most people. There's a little bit of a nail right here that should be at the exact same height as the first roller to pull the material through. Some planers, you're just going to measure the thickness and you're going to go by the gauge on the side and it will tell you. There's another way to do this that is foolproof. You can use it for any planer and it works. Well, let me take that back. It works for any planer that doesn't have anti-kickback fingers on it, because you can't pull the material back out if there's kickback fingers in there. Otherwise, this method will work. And this is the method I like. So what I'm going to do, right now the material will easily fit in and out. There's nothing holding onto the material. The knob that lowers and raises the distance between the table and the cutter head will usually be the same for all tools, which is one rotation is a 32nd of an inch, or one rotation is a 16th of an inch. I believe in this one it's a 16th, and our others it's a 16th. So that means that half a turn is a 32nd. That's a real good thing to know. So what we're going to do is come down here until the planer just grabs the material. That's why I'm moving it back and forth. Okay, when it feels like it pinches. So right there, the front wheel grabs. If I go back a half turn, right there it's loose. Nothing's grabbing at the front wheel. So I'm going to start, that's where it grabs at the front wheel. That's going to be my first cut. At that distance, as long as your board is consistent in thickness, otherwise you're doing this with the thickest part of the board, that will give me a cut all the way through. If the board is thinner in some locations, you will have to have a partner out here to secure the board and pull through until you get to a thick spot again, or pull it all the way out, make it a smaller cut, and then run it again. We don't want to cut too much in one pass because the wood can wedge itself in and not be able to be pulled through. So that's the best way to set the height, in my opinion. It works, it's foolproof, and you know that the machine is not going to end up kicking the board back out if you do that correctly. So, looking at the next step, number 8 says don't try to remove too much material in one pass to get a smooth cut. We just read this, right? To get a smooth cut with minimal tear out, the planer should be set to a 32nd of an inch. So what that means is that as you make the first cut and you get the material back, so you should set your material here if you have a buddy back here, you're going to take this thing, the adjustment wheel, and you're going to go half a turn. Not a full turn, 1/2 of a rotation. That's now a 32nd smaller. And then after it gets cut again, you'll go another half rotation. That's a 32nd smaller. And then as you keep doing it, when the entire top surface has been cut, you'll be able to say, okay, my piece is now perfectly parallel top and bottom. It's done at this machine, unless you need to make a specific thickness. Then you go to the thickness you want. Number 9, never put your hands in the planer. Okay, that should be self-explanatory, but you're never going to put your hands in here. That's extremely dangerous. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to hold on to the stock like this where your fingers are underneath the board. You want to hold on to the stock from the sides where your fingers are not underneath. That way, if it grabs it and it holds it all of a sudden down really hard against the bottom because it's going to pinch it and pull it through, you don't want your fingers getting caught in here and then dragged into that thing. That would be very dangerous. So you hold from the sides and then push your piece in. If you got a large board, you're going to be holding onto it back here as you feed it, and by the time you get to the table, you've let go of the board. It should be pulling itself and feeding through on its own. Okay, number 10, never plane end grain. We talked about this in depth over at the joiner, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, please see my joiner video. Number 11, always tie back or tuck in loose clothes, jewelry, hoodie cords, or long hair to prevent them from getting caught in moving parts. Anything that has a rotating part that you're using causes a hazard for pulling in. If some kind of loose cord or loose clothing gets wrapped around it, it's going to pull you in. So never have anything loose. Make sure that stuff's tucked in and you don't have any dangles, okay? Number 14, most planers operate around 92 decibels when cutting and require hearing protection for safe operation. This is a quiet machine, but it is still loud enough to damage your hearing. I highly recommend when you're using a planer, you wear hearing protection. The larger the piece of wood and the harder the piece of wood, the louder it's going to get while you're using it. Number 13, always plane stock with the grain. Planing across or perpendicular to the grain will shred the wood. So that again is part of that conversation we talked about with end grain. If you have a large board that is being fed through here and you feed it through sideways, so if the grain is kind of going in this direction and you run it through, that's like feeding end grain through. The likelihood of that board splitting on you as it's being held against the long grain direction, or with the long grain direction, and split, and then part of it being chucked or thrown back out, the grain will roll up. There's a whole bunch of potential issues there. You always want long grain to be fed into the machine so it can safely be cut, and the wood will end up on the other side where it can be removed. No end grain and no sideways grain being fed into the machine. Long grain only. Let's see. Never look into the planer while the machine is running to prevent particulates or particles from hitting your face or eyes. If the thing gets stuck, don't be like, gee, George, what's going on in there? That's really stupid. You don't look in the machine. If it's totally stuck and you can't get it through, turn the thing off. After it's done, disconnect the power. Then we can raise the blade, lower the table, and get it out, whatever we got to do, and inspect what's going on. You don't look down there. Otherwise, the second you look down there is the second it's going to throw something out at your face and cause a hazard. That's basic Murphy's Law. Number 15, the last question says, stay clear of unexpected flying materials. You should operate the planer from the side of the machine, staying clear of the in-feed path. So as much as possible, try not to stand directly behind what you're working on. Stand slightly to the side of it and then feed your material. And then have someone else over here receive the material and then put the material as it comes out of the machine, have it put back on top of the machine. Then you can take the material, make your 1/32 adjustment, half a turn, and then feed the material again. With all that being said, let me make a quick cut. I'm going to do this again without the dust collector on, so I'm only going to make one pass so the mess is not too big back here. Otherwise, there's going to be a big mess to clean up. So, dust gate is open. I'm going to raise the cutter head up again. That's loose. Right there, it starts to grab. Again, loose. Right there, it starts to grab. So I'm going to go, I want it to really grab. I'm going to go a half turn where I know it started to grab, a half turn more of a cut. So then you turn it on. Will all be set up on top by the person working on the other side. And then you can see that this top edge is nice and flat. It's parallel to the bottom. If you're unsure if you've cut the whole thing, I would suggest you take your pencil, put a squiggly line like this over the whole surface. Then when it goes through, if the squiggly line is all gone, you know you're good. Perfect. All right, that being said, you guys are ready for the next step.